It was supposed to be the perfect trap. Congressman Ted Lieu had spent weeks preparing for this moment, assembling evidence, crafting questions, and building a prosecutorial narrative that would finally expose what he believed was the Trump administration's massive cover-up of the Jeffrey Epstein files. The California Democrat had video evidence, witness testimony, and a smoking gun question that he was certain would force FBI Director Kash Patel into an impossible corner. In the packed House Judiciary Committee hearing room on September 17, 2025, with cameras rolling and millions watching live, Lieu was about to spring his trap. He played a damning video clip of journalist Michael Wolff, claiming Epstein had shown him compromising photos of Trump with underage girls. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Patel. This was it. The moment that would either vindicate months of Democratic investigations or backfire spectacularly. What happened next would stun everyone in that chamber, from seasoned political reporters to partisan operatives on both sides. Patel's response wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a dodge, wasn't a deflection, wasn't the careful bureaucratic non-answer that Washington insiders had grown accustomed to. It was something completely different. Something that would change the entire trajectory of the Epstein investigation and leave Ted Lieu scrambling to recover from a confrontation that hadn't gone according to his carefully prepared script. The hearing had been contentious from the start. This was Patel's second day of congressional testimony in 48 hours, and the FBI director was already exhausted from more than 4 hours of brutal questioning before the Senate Judiciary Committee the previous day. But if fatigue was affecting him, he wasn't showing it. Patel sat at the witness table with the same calm, controlled demeanor he had displayed throughout his Senate appearance, his hands folded in front of him, his expression revealing nothing about what he was thinking or feeling. Ted Lieu, however, was energized. The congressman from California's 33rd District had made a name for himself as one of the most effective questioners in congressional hearings, using his background as a former military prosecutor to methodically build cases against witnesses who tried to evade or mislead the committee. He had a reputation for being prepared, being precise, and being relentless, and he had been planning this moment for a very long time. The Epstein files had become a political albatross for the Trump administration. After months of promising full transparency and complete disclosure, after Attorney General Pam Bondi had publicly committed to releasing everything, the administration had walked back those promises and released only a fraction of what was in the FBI's possession. The explanation that court orders and grand jury secrecy rules prevented full disclosure had been met with skepticism from both Democrats and some Republicans who suspected the real reason was that the files contained damaging information about President Trump and his associates. Lieu had been one of the most vocal critics of this approach. In multiple press conferences and television appearances, he had argued that the administration was deliberately hiding evidence of Trump's relationship with Epstein, that Patel was complicit in a massive cover-up, and that the American people deserved to know the full truth about what the FBI knew regarding Epstein's crimes and his connections to powerful political figures. But criticism in press conferences is one thing. Proving it in a congressional hearing on the record under oath is something entirely different. And that's exactly what Lieu intended to do on this September afternoon. He had assembled what he believed was an airtight case, a series of questions that would systematically demonstrate that Patel was hiding information specifically to protect Trump. The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. First, establish that there were allegations of Trump with underage girls. Second, ask Patel directly if such evidence existed in FBI files. Third, use Patel's inevitable evasion or refusal to answer as proof of a cover-up. It was the kind of prosecutorial trap that Lieu had used successfully dozens of times before, in military courts, in congressional hearings, in public debates. There was no way Patel could answer the question directly without either admitting damaging information existed or lying under oath. Either way, Lieu would have his gotcha moment. The hearing room was packed beyond capacity. More than 200 journalists crowded into the press gallery, their phones and laptops ready to capture what everyone expected would be explosive testimony about the Epstein case. Cable news networks had cleared their afternoon programming to broadcast the hearing live. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about what revelations might emerge. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. When Lieu's turn to question Patel finally came, nearly 3 hours into the hearing, the congressman didn't waste any time with pleasantries or preliminaries. He immediately went for the jugular, playing a video clip on the large screens positioned around the hearing room. The clip showed journalist Michael Wolff, who had written books about Trump, making an extraordinary claim in a television interview. "Epstein showed me photos," Wolff said in the video, his voice clear and confident. "Photos of Trump with young girls, very young girls, girls whose age was uncertain. And Epstein was very proud of these photos. He thought they gave him leverage." The clip ended, and the room fell into a profound silence. This was the smoking gun that Lieu had been waiting to deploy. Not just an allegation, not just a rumor, but a specific claim from a journalist who had interviewed Epstein, who claimed to have seen actual photographic evidence of Trump with underage girls. Lieu let the silence hang for a moment, allowing the weight of Wolff's allegation to sink in with everyone in the room and everyone watching at home. Then, looking directly at Patel, he asked the question that was supposed to end the FBI director's career and expose the administration's cover-up once and for all. "Director Patel," Lieu said, his voice carrying the calm confidence of a prosecutor who knows he has his target cornered, "are there any photos showing Donald Trump with girls of an uncertain age? Yes or no?" It was a perfectly crafted question. Binary. Clear, impossible to evade without looking guilty. Either such photos existed in FBI files or they didn't. Either Patel would admit they existed, which would be politically devastating for Trump, or he would claim they didn't exist, which Lieu could then use to build a case that the FBI was hiding evidence. It was a win-win for the congressman and a lose-lose for the FBI director. The cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, capturing every micro-expression, every hint of emotion that might reveal his internal calculation. Political reporters leaned forward in their seat. Democratic staff members exchanged knowing glances, confident they were about to witness the beginning of the end for Kash Patel. Republican staff members looked worried, wondering how their guy was going to get out of this trap. But Kash Patel didn't look worried. He didn't look trapped. He didn't look like a man who was scrambling to find an evasive answer to an impossible question. Instead, he looked directly at Ted Lieu, and with the same calm, measured tone he had used throughout the hearing, he gave an answer that no one in that room expected. "No," Patel said simply, just one word. No qualifications, no hedges, no bureaucratic evasions, just a flat, unequivocal denial that such photos existed. Lieu's expression flickered for just a moment, a brief flash of surprise quickly masked by prosecutorial skepticism. This wasn't the response he had anticipated. He had expected evasion, had prepared follow-up questions for evasion. A direct denial was actually more difficult to work with because it required him to prove the negative, to demonstrate that Patel was lying rather than simply hiding behind procedure. "How do you know that?" Lieu asked, pivoting quickly to his backup line of questioning. It was still a good question, designed to expose whether Patel had actually reviewed all the files or was just making assumptions. If Patel admitted he hadn't personally reviewed everything, Lieu could argue he was speaking without knowledge. If Patel claimed he had reviewed everything, Lieu could question whether that was credible given the volume of material. But again, Patel's response wasn't what Lieu expected. Instead of getting defensive or technical, Patel leaned forward slightly and delivered an answer that completely reframed the entire line of questioning, because that information would have been brought to light by multiple administrations and FBI investigators over the course of the last 20 years. If such photos existed, if there was any credible evidence of President Trump with underage girls, it would have surfaced long ago. The Obama administration investigated these matters. Career FBI agents who are not political appointees investigated these matters. Are you suggesting that all of them, across multiple administrations, across multiple political parties, have been engaged in a massive conspiracy to protect Donald Trump. The response was devastating in its logic and its political jiu-jitsu. Patel had turned Lieu's attempted gotcha moment into an indictment of the congressman's own conspiracy theory. By invoking the Obama and Biden administrations, by pointing out that career FBI agents had been investigating Epstein for years, Patel was essentially arguing that if such evidence existed, Trump's political enemies would have already used it against him. Ted Lieu recognized immediately that he was losing control of the exchange, that what was supposed to be his moment to expose Patel was turning into something else entirely. He needed to regain the initiative, to get back on script, to force Patel into the corner he had spent weeks planning. Director Patel, Lieu pressed, the Epstein estate has materials that haven't been fully reviewed by the FBI. Michael Wolff claims he has audio tapes of his interviews with Epstein that could contain relevant information. Shouldn't the FBI be subpoenaing all of this material? It was a good recovery, a pivot back to substance and away from the broader conspiracy theory implications of Patel's previous answer. Lieu was trying to establish that the FBI wasn't doing enough to investigate, that Patel was deliberately avoiding looking at evidence that might be damaging to Trump. But once again, Patel had an answer ready that completely undermined Lieu's premise. Congressman, the FBI has already reached out to the Epstein estate multiple times requesting voluntary cooperation. Patel explained patiently, as if talking to someone who didn't understand how law enforcement worked. The estate has declined to provide materials voluntarily. As for subpoenas, the Epstein estate is a private entity. They're under no legal obligation to comply with an FBI subpoena for materials that are not related to an ongoing criminal investigation. That's just false. Lieu shot back, his frustration now clearly visible. You're the frickin' FBI. You have subpoena power. You can compel the estate to provide these materials. The use of profanity, even mild profanity, in a congressional hearing was unusual enough to draw gasps from some committee members. But Lieu was clearly flustered now, his carefully constructed prosecutorial approach giving way to genuine anger at a witness who refused to play his assigned role in the drama Lieu had choreographed. Patel remained calm, almost maddeningly so in the face of Lieu's growing agitation. Congressman, with respect, you're conflating different types of subpoena authority, he explained. The FBI can issue administrative subpoenas for specific types of records in ongoing investigations. But the Epstein criminal investigation is closed. He's dead. His accomplice Maxwell is in prison. Without an active criminal investigation, our subpoena authority is limited. We would need a grand jury subpoena, which requires going through the courts and demonstrating probable cause that specific materials are relevant to specific criminal conduct. It was a technical answer, but it was also accurate. And it completely diffused Lieu's attempt to portray Patel as deliberately refusing to pursue evidence. The FBI director wasn't hiding behind bureaucracy, he was explaining the actual legal constraints on his authority. It might not have been the answer Lieu wanted, but it was an answer that was difficult to dispute without looking like he didn't understand basic law enforcement procedures. The exchange continued for several more minutes, with Lieu trying various angles to trap Patel into admitting either that evidence existed or that he wasn't doing enough to find it. But with each question, Patel calmly explained the FBI's actions, the legal constraints they were operating under, and the difference between politically motivated speculation and actual criminal evidence. At one point, Lieu asked whether Trump's name appeared anywhere in the Epstein file. It was another attempt at a gotcha question, designed to force Patel to either confirm Trump was mentioned or refuse to answer, which could be spun as evidence of a cover-up. Patel's response was again unexpectedly direct. Of course, President Trump's name appears in Epstein-related materials, he said matter-of-factly. Jeffrey Epstein was a well-known figure in certain social circles that included many wealthy and famous people, including Donald Trump. The mere mention of someone's name in investigative files doesn't indicate criminal wrongdoing. What matters is whether there's credible evidence of criminal conduct. And I'm telling you under oath that there is no such evidence regarding President Trump in the materials the FBI has reviewed. The answer was politically brilliant, because it was honest without being damaging. Yes, Trump knew Epstein. Everyone knew that. Yes, Trump's name appeared in files. That was inevitable. But no, there wasn't evidence of criminal wrongdoing. By being forthright about the connection while denying the criminality, Patel had effectively inoculated himself against charges of cover-up while also protecting Trump from baseless accusations. But Lieu had one more card to play, one final attempt to spring his trap. He brought up the infamous birthday letter, a document recently released by the House Oversight Committee that appeared to show Trump writing Epstein a birthday greeting with a suggestive drawing of a woman's silhouette. Trump had denied writing the letter, calling it a forgery. Director Patel, Lieu asked, will the FBI investigate the Epstein estate for releasing what President Trump claims is a forged document with a fake signature? It was a clever gambit. If Patel agreed to investigate, it would suggest he thought the letter might be fake, which would undermine its credibility. If he refused to investigate, Democrats could claim he was letting Epstein's estate distribute forged documents that falsely linked Trump to a pedophile. But Patel saw the trap and sidestepped it effortlessly. If the president wants to file a formal complaint alleging forgery, the FBI will investigate it like any other forgery complaint, he said. But I'm not going to open FBI investigations based on casual suggestions made during congressional hearings. That would be an inappropriate use of federal law enforcement resources. The answer was perfect, because it was both responsive and non-committal. Patel wasn't saying the letter was real or fake. He wasn't defending Trump or attacking him. He was simply maintaining that the FBI investigates actual complaints, not political talking points. As Lieu's questioning time expired, it was clear to everyone in the hearing room that something unexpected had happened. The congressman had come armed with what he thought was devastating evidence, had crafted what he believed were impossible to answer questions, had built what he was certain was an airtight case against the FBI director. But instead of the triumphant exposure of wrongdoing that Lieu had envisioned, the exchange had turned into a masterclass in how to deflect hostile questioning without appearing evasive. Conservative media immediately declared victory, with headlines like Patel destroys Lieu's Epstein ambush, and FBI Director schools Democrat on law enforcement basics. Liberal commentators were more circumspect, acknowledging that Lieu hadn't gotten the smoking gun he was looking for, but insisting that Patel's answers raised more questions than they answered. But the real significance of the exchange wasn't about who won or lost the confrontation. It was about what Patel's answers revealed about the actual state of the Epstein investigation and the evidence, or lack thereof, connecting Trump to Epstein's crimes. By giving direct answers instead of evasive ones, by invoking previous administrations' investigations instead of hiding behind executive privilege, by explaining legal constraints instead of ignoring them, Patel had effectively diffused what was supposed to be the Democrats' most powerful line of attack. In the days following the hearing, the implications of the Lieu-Patel exchange became clearer. Democrats who had been promising that the Epstein files contained bombshell revelations about Trump began walking back those claims. Media outlets that had breathlessly reported on every Epstein-Trump connection started running more nuanced stories acknowledging that connections and evidence of crimes were two different things. And Republicans who had been worried about what might be in the unreleased files began citing Patel's testimony as proof that there was nothing there worth hiding. Ted Lieu's attempt to corner Kash Patel had failed not because Patel was evasive, but because he was direct. Not because he hid behind procedure, but because he explained the actual procedures. Not because he protected Trump, but because he told the truth as he knew it, under oath. In a forum where lying would be a career-ending crime, it was a reminder that sometimes the best defense against a prosecutorial ambush isn't clever evasion, it's simply having the facts on your side and the courage to state them clearly. And it was a lesson that Ted Lieu, for all his skills as a questioner, hadn't counted on learning that day in the House Judiciary Committee hearing room. The aftermath of the hearing continued to reverberate through Washington in the weeks that followed. What had seemed like a guaranteed victory for Democrats, catching Patel in a cover-up about Trump and Epstein, had instead turned into a defensive retreat as the implications of Patel's direct answers sank in. The problem for Democrats wasn't just that Patel had given good answers, it was that his answers were verifiable and logical. When he said multiple administrations had investigated without finding criminal evidence linking Trump to Epstein's crimes, that was a fact that could be checked. When he explained the legal limitations on FBI subpoena power regarding closed investigations, that was an explanation that legal experts confirmed was accurate. When he stated stated under oath that no credible evidence existed of Trump with underage girls, he was making a claim that would be perjury if false, and that dozens of career FBI agents could contradict if it wasn't true. Congressional Democrats found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They had spent months building up public expectations that the Epstein files would contain damning evidence about Trump. They had repeatedly suggested that Patel and the Trump administration were engaged in a cover-up. They had promised their supporters that congressional hearings would expose the truth. But Patel's testimony had essentially called their bluff, and now they had to either produce evidence that contradicted his sworn statements or admit they had been speculating based on suspicion rather than fact. Representative Jamie Raskin, the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee, tried to maintain the offensive by continuing to demand the release of all Epstein-related materials, but his arguments became increasingly strained as he tried to reconcile his claims of a cover-up with Patel's testimony that there was nothing criminal to cover up regarding Trump. If there's nothing incriminating, then release everything, Raskin argued in multiple television appearances. But legal experts pointed out that this logic was backwards. The absence of criminal evidence wasn't a reason to violate grand jury secrecy rules, attorney-client privileges, or other legal protections that applied to investigative materials. Meanwhile, Ted Lieu found himself in the awkward position of having to defend his line of questioning despite its obvious failure to produce the results he had promised. In interviews after the hearing, he continued to insist that Patel wasn't being fully transparent, that there were still questions that needed answers, that the FBI should be doing more to investigate. But when pressed on specifics, what exactly should the FBI be investigating that they weren't? What evidence suggested Patel was lying under oath? What legal authorities existed that the FBI wasn't using? Lieu's answers became vague and general. The most telling moment came during a CNN interview 3 days after the hearing, when Lieu was asked directly whether he believed Patel had lied under oath. When he said there was no evidence of Trump with underage girls. "I think Director Patel is being very careful with his words." Lieu responded carefully. When he says there's no evidence, he's speaking narrowly about what's in FBI files that have been reviewed. But there could be evidence in materials the FBI hasn't obtained, or in testimony they haven't taken, or in records they haven't examined. The answer was telling because it essentially conceded that Lieu had no evidence to contradict Patel's sworn testimony. He was reduced to speculating about evidence that might exist somewhere, somehow, if only the FBI looked hard enough. It was a far cry from the confident accusations of cover-up that had characterized his questioning just days. The political implications extended beyond just the Epstein files controversy. Patel's performance in the hearing, calm, direct, knowledgeable, and confident, had rehabilitated his image among many Republicans who had been concerned about his qualifications and temperament. Instead of the internet troll that his critics had portrayed him as, Patel had demonstrated an ability to handle hostile questioning without losing his composure or resorting to evasion. Conservative media figures who had expressed doubts about Patel after his controversial handling of the Charlie Kirk assassination investigation began walking back their criticism. Fox News host Tucker Carlson, who had questioned whether Patel had the gravitas needed for the FBI director position, devoted a segment of his show to praising Patel's testimony. "This is what we need in federal law enforcement," Carlson said, "not bureaucrats who hide behind procedure and give non-answers, but leaders who are willing to state facts clearly and defend their positions confidently." Even some moderate Democrats privately admitted that Lieu's questioning had backfired. Ted went in there looking for a Perry Mason moment. One senior Democratic congressional aide told Politico on condition of anonymity. Instead, he gave Patel a platform to definitively state, under oath, that there's no evidence against Trump. That's the opposite of what we needed. The broader impact on the Epstein files controversy was significant. What had been a sustained political liability for the Trump administration, the perception that they were hiding something about Trump's relationship with Epstein, had been largely neutralized by Patel's direct testimony. It was now much harder for critics to claim a cover-up when the FBI director had explicitly denied, under oath, that there was anything criminal to cover up. This didn't mean the controversy disappeared entirely. Democrats continued to push for the release of more materials, and some Trump critics continued to insist that something nefarious must be hidden in the unreleased files. but the political potency of the issue had been significantly diminished. Without evidence to contradict Patel's testimony, and with the FBI director having put his credibility and potentially his freedom on the line by testifying under oath, the accusations of cover-up began to sound increasingly like conspiracy theories rather than legitimate oversight concerns. The Lieu-Patel exchange also had implications for how future congressional hearings would be conducted. For years, aggressive questioning by skilled prosecutors turned congressmen like Lieu had been an effective tool for extracting damaging admissions or creating viral moments that would dominate news cycles. But Patel had demonstrated that this approach could be neutralized by a witness who was simply willing to give direct answers, even if those answers were politically charged. Other Trump administration officials took note of Patel's strategy. In subsequent congressional hearings on various topics, witnesses began adopting a similar approach, answering questions directly, explaining their reasoning clearly, and refusing to be intimidated by hostile questions. The era of the viral gotcha moment in congressional hearings wasn't over, but it had become significantly more difficult to achieve. For Ted Lieu personally, the failed interrogation of Kash Patel was a rare setback in what had been a successful career of high-profile congressional questioning. But it was also a learning experience about the difference between courtroom advocacy, where you're trying to convince a judge or jury, and congressional oversight, where the target audience is the American public, and where a witness who isn't afraid to give controversial answers can often come out ahead. In the end, the exchange between Lieu and Patel became a case study in the limits of prosecutorial technique when applied to congressional oversight. Lieu had done everything right from a tactical perspective. He had prepared meticulously, he had crafted clever questions, he had set careful traps, but he had made one critical miscalculation. He had assumed that Patel would respond like most witnesses do, with evasion and obfuscation. Instead, Patel had responded with directness and clarity, and that had made all the difference. The lesson wasn't that aggressive questioning was ineffective. It was that aggressive questioning only works if the witness has something to hide. When a witness is willing to state uncomfortable facts clearly and defend them confidently, no amount of clever questioning can create a scandal where none exists. And that was perhaps the most important revelation to come out of that September hearing. Not what Patel said about the Epstein files, but what his willingness to say it revealed about the actual strength of the Democrats' case against Trump. 6 months later, when political scientists and communications experts analyzed the most significant congressional hearings of 2025, the Lieu-Patel exchange was frequently cited as a turning point in how Trump administration officials handled congressional oversight. It marked the moment when defensive evasion gave way to aggressive directness, when witnesses stopped acting like they had something to hide and started acting like they were willing to defend their actions and statements regardless of political consequence. Ted Lieu had thought he had Kash Patel cornered. Instead, Patel had shown that sometimes the best way to escape a corner is to refuse to act cornered, and in doing so he had changed the dynamics of congressional oversight in ways that would influence Washington politics for years to come. The American people watching at home came away with their own lessons. Some saw Patel's performance as proof that the Epstein-Trump conspiracy theories were baseless. Others saw it as evidence that Patel was a skilled liar willing to commit perjury to protect Trump. But almost everyone, regardless of their political leanings, came away with a new understanding of how congressional hearings worked, or didn't work, in the modern political environment. And that understanding would shape how they evaluated future hearings, future accusations, and future attempts to use congressional oversight as a tool for political accountability. The ripple effects of the hearing extended far beyond the immediate political implications. Within the FBI itself, agents who had been demoralized by months of political attacks and media criticism found themselves suddenly energized by their director's performance. For the first time since Patel took office, career agents felt like they had a leader who would defend the Bureau's work publicly and forcefully, rather than trying to appease critics with careful non-answer. Director Patel showed us what leadership looks like. One 20-year FBI veteran told colleagues in an email that was later leaked to the press. He didn't throw us under the bus to score political points. He didn't pretend we weren't doing our job. He stood up there and defended the integrity of our investigations, even when it would have been easier to equivocate. That's the kind of director we need. This sentiment was echoed across FBI field offices nationwide. Agents who had been skeptical of Patel's qualifications and concerned about his political loyalties began to see him differently after watching him handle Liu's questioning. The FBI director, who many had dismissed as a Trump loyalist with no real law enforcement experience, had demonstrated a deep understanding of investigative procedures, legal constraints, and the importance of protecting the Bureau's credibility, even when it meant giving politically uncomfortable answers. The hearing also had unexpected consequences for the broader debate about government transparency and accountability. Patel's willingness to give direct answers about the Epstein investigation, even when those answers were politically charged, set a new standard for how executive branch officials engage with congressional oversight. The old model of careful non-answers and bureaucratic evasion had been replaced by something more direct and, paradoxically, more credible. Legal scholars who studied the hearing noticed something significant in Patel's testimony strategy. Unlike many government officials who hide behind claims of ongoing investigations or executive privilege, Patel had made specific factual claims under oath that could be verified or contradicted. He hadn't just said, "I can't discuss that," or "that information is classified." He had said no such evidence exists, and multiple administrations investigated without finding criminal wrongdoing. These were falsifiable claims that put his credibility and potentially his freedom at risk if proven false. What Patel did was actually quite brave from a legal perspective, noted Professor Jonathan Turley, a constitutional law expert at George Washington University. By making specific factual claims under oath, rather than hiding behind procedure, he exposed himself to potential perjury charges if he's wrong. That's not something a director would do if he was engaged in a cover-up. It's what someone does when they're confident in the facts and willing to stake their reputation on them. This point was particularly significant because multiple former FBI officials, people who had been fired or forced out during Patel's tenure, could have contradicted his testimony if it was false. The fact that none of them came forward to dispute his claims about the Epstein investigation suggested that whatever else might be controversial about Patel's leadership, his testimony about the evidence in FBI files was accurate. The political ramifications continued to play out in subtle but important ways. Democratic fundraising emails that had previously highlighted the Trump-Epstein cover-up became noticeably less frequent after the hearing. Campaign strategists recognized that continuing to push an angle that had been so thoroughly debunked under oath might backfire, making Democrats look like conspiracy theorists rather than legitimate oversight. Meanwhile, Trump himself had been following the hearing closely and was reportedly thrilled with Patel's performance. In a private phone call to the FBI director that evening, Trump allegedly told Patel, "You did great today. Ted Lieu thought he was going to destroy you, and instead you destroyed him. That's how you handle these people. Don't give them an inch, don't apologize, just tell the truth and let them deal with it." The president's satisfaction with Patel's testimony had important implications for the FBI director's job security. There had been speculation in recent weeks that Trump might replace Patel after the controversial handling of the Charlie Kirk investigation and the criticism from some conservative commentators. But the Lieu hearing had demonstrated that Patel could be an effective defender of Trump's interests while maintaining a veneer of institutional independence. That combination of loyalty and credibility made him more valuable than ever to the administration. For Ted Lieu, the failed interrogation became a cautionary tale about the limits of clever questioning when confronting a witness who refuses to play defense. In subsequent hearings, colleagues noticed that Lieu adjusted his approach, asking more open-ended questions designed to elicit information rather than trap witnesses in contradiction. The change was subtle but significant, a recognition that the old prosecutorial playbook wasn't working against this new generation of Trump administration officials who had learned from Patel's example. The media coverage of the hearing also revealed interesting patterns in how different outlets chose to frame the exchange. Conservative media uniformly declared Patel the victor, with headlines like "FBI Director Demolishes Democrats' Gotcha Attempt" and "Patel's Truth Bomb Silences Epstein Conspiracy Theory." Liberal outlets were more divided, with some acknowledging that Lieu hadn't gotten the smoking gun he sought while others insisted that Patel's answers only raised more questions. But perhaps most tellingly, mainstream fact-checkers who reviewed Patel's testimony found his claims to be accurate, as far as they could be verified. PolitiFact rated his statement about multiple administrations investigating as true, noting that both Obama and Biden administration FBI officials had reviewed Epstein-related material. The Washington Post's fact-checker gave his explanation of subpoena limitations, 3 Pinocchios initially, but later retracted the rating after legal experts confirmed Patel's explanation was substantially correct. The technical accuracy of Patel's answers was important because it undercut the narrative that he was simply lying to protect Trump. If he had been evasive or provided information that was later proven false, Democrats would have had grounds to pursue perjury charges, or at least claim vindication for their suspicions of a cover-up. But the fact that his testimony held up under scrutiny made it much harder to maintain that narrative. In the months that followed, the Lieu-Patel exchange became required viewing in political communications courses, as an example of how direct communication can be more effective than carefully crafted evasion. Students studied how Patel's willingness to make definitive statements, even controversial ones, had given him credibility that carefully hedged answers would have undermined. They analyzed how his invocation of previous administrations' investigations had neutralized accusations of partisan bias. They examined how his calm demeanor under hostile questioning had made Lieu's frustration appear petulant rather than justified. The hearing also became a case study in how the dynamics of congressional oversight had changed in the Trump era. The old model where witnesses would spend hours carefully avoiding direct answers while claiming cooperation had been replaced by something more combative and ironically more transparent. Witnesses who were willing to defend their positions forcefully and give controversial answers often came out ahead of those who tried to hide behind procedure and protocol. For the American public, the lasting impact of the hearing was more subtle but potentially more important. Millions of viewers had watched a congressman deploy what appeared to be a devastating line of questioning, only to see it systematically dismantled by direct answers that they could judge for themselves. It was a reminder that congressional hearings, for all their theater and drama, sometimes revealed truth rather than manufactured scandal. And it suggested that maybe, just maybe, not every controversy was a cover-up, not every denial was a lie, and not every administration official was engaged in corruption. In the end, what shocked everyone wasn't what Patel revealed about the Epstein file. It was what he revealed about the power of direct answers to disarm even the most skilled congressional inquisitors. Ted Lieu had come prepared for evasion, but Patel had given him truth, or at least his version of it stated clearly and under oath. And sometimes, in Washington, the truth is the most shocking answer.